The Wyoming sun hung low over the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the weathered porch where Nathaniel Caldwell sat with his hands folded in his lap. At 65, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen both fortune and devastation, who had built an empire from nothing and watched it mean less with each passing year. Beside him, his grandson Thomas perched on the railing, 12 years old and hungry for stories the way only boys that age can be. Thomas, tell me something. You ever wonder why your grandpa lives out here alone, 20 miles from the nearest town, in a house big enough for 20 people? Thomas shook his head, eyes wide with the anticipation of a tale he sensed coming. Well, Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying the gravel of age and tobacco, this story begins 25 years ago, in the winter of 1885. I was 40 years old then, and I was the richest man within 200 miles. I owned 8,000 acres of prime grazing land, 2,000 head of cattle, and a house I had built with my own hands and my own money. But I was also the loneliest soul you ever could imagine. The old man paused, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky. That December, during the worst blizzard anyone had seen in a decade, I nearly let two people die right outside my door. A woman and her little girl, frozen half to death, starving, desperate. And if I had not opened that door, if I had not made the choice I made that night, you would not be sitting here right now, because that woman became your grandmother, and that little girl grew up to be your mother. Thomas leaned forward, captivated. This is the story of how I learned that all the money in the world means nothing if you have no one to share it with. This is the story of how a blizzard saved my life by nearly ending two others. The scene shifted then, like a curtain drawing back on a stage, revealing another time, another winter, another man who bore Nathaniel's name, but not yet his wisdom. December 7th, 1885, Wyoming Territory. The wind howled like a wounded animal, driving snow horizontally across the prairie in sheets so thick a man could barely see his hand before his face. Inside the main house of the Caldwell Ranch, Nathaniel sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a letter in the other. The letter was 5 years old, creased and worn from countless readings. It was the last thing his wife Rebecca had ever written to him. My dearest Nate, the words read in her careful script. I know you must close the cattle deal in Cheyenne. I know our future depends on it. Do not worry about me. The baby and I will be fine until you return. A man must do what a man must do. I love you always, your Rebecca. She had died 3 days after writing those words. Died while he was 2 days' ride away, shaking hands with cattle buyers and signing contracts worth $15,000. Died while he was building his fortune and abandoning his family. Nathaniel drained the whiskey glass and poured another. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth could not reach the cold place in his chest where his heart used to be. The clock on the mantel read 2 in the morning when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it, a scratching, tapping sound at the front door. Probably just the wind, he thought, probably branches blown against the wood. But something made him rise from his chair, made him cross the room, made him grip the door handle and pull it open. The wind nearly tore the door from his hands. Snow rushed into the house like an invading army, and there on his porch, collapsed in a heap of frozen clothing in desperation, lay 2 figures. A woman and a child, both so pale they looked like corpses already. For 5 seconds, Nathaniel stood frozen. In those 5 seconds, he saw Rebecca's face. He saw the empty bed he had come home to. He saw the tiny grave beside hers, the son he never got to meet. He saw 5 years of guilt crystallized into this single moment, this single choice. Then he moaned. He dropped to his knees beside the woman and scooped her and the child into his arms. They were impossibly light, as if starvation had hollowed them out from the inside. The woman's lips moved, forming words that barely made sound. Please, she whispered, please do not let my daughter die. We have not eaten in 5 days. The child, no more than 5 years old, stirred weakly in her mother's arms. Mama, the little girl said, Mama is so cold. Nathaniel carried them both inside and kicked the door shut against the storm. His hands shook as he laid them on the floor near the fire. Not too close, never too close when treating hypothermia. He had learned that lesson years ago in the Montana wilderness, had seen men die from warming too quickly, their hearts giving out from the shock. He stripped away their wet clothes with clinical efficiency, wrapping them in dry wool blankets from the closet. The woman had brown hair matted with ice. The child clutched a ragged doll in fingers so cold they had turned blue. Both of them shivered violently, which was a good sign. Shivering meant the body was still fighting. Nathaniel moved to the kitchen and heated water on the stove. Not too hot, just warm enough. He added salt and sugar, an old trick for restoring strength. He brought the cup to the child first, lifting her head gently and pressing the rim to her lips. "Drink, little one," he said softly. "Just small sips." The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were brown, Budak, terrified. "Are you an angel?" she asked. Something broke inside Nathaniel's chest at those words. "No, child," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am just a man trying to fix his mistakes." The girl drank, and color slowly returned to her cheeks. Nathaniel repeated the process with the woman, who regained consciousness more slowly. When her eyes finally opened, they were filled with panic. "Emma!" she gasped, trying to sit up. "Where is my daughter?" "Right here," Nathaniel assured her, keeping his hand on her shoulder to steady her. "She is safe. You both are." The woman looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully under the blankets, and tears began to stream down her face. Not gentle tears, but great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Nathaniel sat back and let her cry, understanding that sometimes grief and relief are so intertwined, they become the same thing. When she finally calmed enough to speak, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I thought we were going to die out there." "I thought that was the end." "What is your name?" Nathaniel asked. "Clara. Clara Morgan. And this is Emma, my daughter." "Well, Clara Morgan, you are in my home now and you are safe. But I need to know, what brought you to my door in the middle of a blizzard? Where did you come from?" And so Clara told her story. She had been a widow for nearly 2 years, she explained, as dawn broke outside and the blizzard began to weaken. Her husband David had died of dysentery in Philadelphia in 1884, leaving her with $600 and a 5-year-old daughter. She had sold their small farm and bought passage west, hoping to reach California where her sister lived. But David's brother Vincent had other plans. Vincent Whitmore was a saloon keeper in Philadelphia with gambling debts that reached into the thousands. He had loaned David money years ago, money that was never properly documented, money that Vincent now claimed Clara owed him with interest. When Clara refused to pay, Vincent went to the courts. He filed for guardianship of Emma, claiming that a widow woman could not properly care for a child, that Clara was mentally unstable, that the girl needed a proper male guardian. He bribed a judge named Robert Henley with $150, and Henley signed the guardianship papers. "So I ran," Clara said, staring into the fire. "I took Emma and whatever money I had left, and we ran. We have been running for 8 months now. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Nebraska. Vincent hired a detective to track us. Every time we settled somewhere, he found us. Every time we found work, we had to leave it behind." She described selling her wedding ring to buy the old wagon and the aging horse named Belle. She described the axle breaking 3 days ago, the horse going lame and having to be put down with their last bullet. She described walking through the snow with Emma in her arms, not knowing where they were going, just knowing they had to keep moving. "We ran out of food on December 2nd, she said quietly. 5 days with nothing to eat except snow. I thought about just lying down in the snow and letting it take us. I thought about how peaceful it would be. But every time I looked at Emma's face, I kept walking." Nathaniel listened to all of this in silence. When she finished, he sat for a long moment, staring at the photograph of Rebecca on the mantel. "You know how much land I own?" he asked finally. Clara shook her head. 8,000 acres. "You know how many cattle I have?" 2,000 head. "You know how many family members I have?" He turned to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "None. Not a single one. 5 years ago, my wife died while I was away closing a business deal. She was 7 months pregnant. I could have been home in 6 hours, but I chose to stay and finish the contract. $15,000, Clara. That is what I valued more than my wife's life. $15,000. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Since then, I have lived like a dead man. I work, I eat, I sleep, I work again. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and it means nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because I have no one to share it with, no one to build for, no one to leave it to. He turned back to face her. So here is what I am going to do. You and Emma are going to stay here, not out of charity and not temporarily. You are going to stay here because I need you to. Because I need a reason to wake up in the morning that is not just another day of existing. Because maybe, just maybe, if I can protect you and your daughter, I can prove to myself that I am still a human being and not just a rich man with a dead soul. Clara stared at him in disbelief. But Vincent will come, she said. He will bring men. He will bring violence. You will be in danger. Nathaniel's jaw hardened. Let him come. This is Wyoming territory, not Philadelphia. Out here, we do not care much about what some Eastern judge says. Out here, we care about what is right. And what is right is that you keep your daughter and that I finally do something that matters more than money. The next 3 days passed in a strange sort of peace. The blizzard cleared, leaving behind snowdrifts 8 feet high and a world transformed into white silence. Clara and Emma settled into the guest rooms, and Nathaniel found himself listening for their footsteps in the hallways, found himself cooking breakfast for 3 instead of 1, found himself smiling at Emma's endless questions about the horses and the cattle and whether snow was made of sugar. On December 10th, Nathaniel gathered his 3 ranch hands in the barn. Jose Martinez, 50 years old and the best tracker in Wyoming. William Harrison, called Buck, a former cavalry sergeant who had fought in the Indian Wars. Samuel Green, 38, a freed slave who could build anything with his hands and had a mind sharp as any engineer. These 3 men had worked for Nathaniel for years, but he had never asked them for anything beyond their labor. Now he needed more. Gentlemen, he began, standing before them in the coal barn, you have all been loyal employees. You have worked hard, and I have paid you fairly. But today I am going to ask you for something beyond your job descriptions. I am going to ask you to help me protect 2 people who have nowhere else to go. He told them about Clara and Emma, about Vincent and the detective, about the guardianship papers and the corrupt judge. Buck spoke first. Boss, he said in his gravelly voice, you have been good to us. You gave me work when no one else would hire an old soldier. You gave Jose a place when other ranchers ran off Mexicans. You gave Samuel respect when most folks would not shake his hand. If you need us to stand with you, we stand. Jose nodded. Samuel added, we are with you, Mr. Caldwell. Whatever comes. Nathaniel felt something in his chest loosen slightly, some knot of tension he had carried for 5 years. Thank you, he said simply. Now here is what we are going to do. They spent the next week preparing. Jose rode out each day to establish observation posts around the ranch perimeter, using mirrors to flash signals when strangers approached. Samuel reinforced the doors and windows, adding iron bars that could be dropped into place. Buck inventoried their weapons and began training Clara to shoot. The first time Clara held the Winchester rifle, her hands shook so badly she could barely aim. I cannot do this, she said. I cannot shoot at people. Buck stood behind her, patient as a teacher. You do not need to shoot people, Mrs. Morgan. You just need to make noise. Bad men fear the sound of gunfire more than they fear bullets. Now breathe out slow and squeeze the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the tin can 50 feet away jumped and fell. I hit it, Clara exclaimed, surprise and pride mixing in her voice. Emma clapped her hands from where she sat on the fence. Mama did it. Mama is a sharpshooter. Everyone laughed, and for a moment it felt like a family. On December 15th, Jose returned from town with news that drained the warmth from the day. Patron, he said urgently, there is a man at the saloon asking questions, offering $5 for information about a young widow with a child. He is from the East, wearing city clothes, traveling with another man, big, with a scar on his face. Clara went pale. Vincent, and probably Jake Malone, the detective. Nathaniel made his decision quickly. I am going to town tomorrow. I will speak with Sheriff Webb. He owes me a favor. December 16th found Nathaniel riding into Cheyenne under a clear, cold sky. The town was bustling with the usual chaos of a territory capital. Cowboys and miners mingled with businessmen and soldiers. The smell of horse manure mixed with wood smoke and whiskey. Sheriff Marcus Webb's office sat at the corner of Main Street and Capitol Avenue. Webb himself was a weathered man of 48, a former Texas Ranger with a bullet scar on his left leg that still caused him to limp. Years ago, Nathaniel had given Webb a place to recover when that bullet nearly ended his career. Now he needed to call in that debt. Webb listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Nathaniel finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Nate, you know I respect you, but if this Vincent fellow has legal papers from a Pennsylvania court, my hands might be tied. Interstate custody issues are complicated." "What if the papers are fraudulent?" Nathaniel pressed. "What if the judge who signed them is corrupt? You have proof of that?" "Not yet, but I will get it." Webb studied him for a long moment. "All right, here's what I can do. I cannot stop him from filing a complaint, but I can slow things down. I can require him to present his case to the territorial judge here in Cheyenne before any action is taken. That will buy you some time." "How much time?" "Maybe a week. Maybe two if we are lucky." Nathaniel nodded. "Then I need to see Benjamin Cross." Benjamin Cross maintained his law office on 16th Street, a modest building with his name painted in gold letters on the window. Cross himself was 52, with gray-streaked hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that gave him the look of a professor more than a frontier lawyer. But Nathaniel knew Cross had graduated from Harvard Law School and had the sharpest legal mind in Wyoming territory. "Mr. Caldwell," Cross greeted him, gesturing to a chair. "What brings you to my office?" Nathaniel laid out the situation. Cross listened intently, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. When Nathaniel finished, Cross set down his pen and looked at him seriously. "You understand that guardianship laws heavily favor blood relatives, especially male relatives. Even if the Pennsylvania court was corrupt, proving it from here will be difficult and time-consuming." "How long?" "Could be months. We would need to request records from Philadelphia, possibly subpoena witnesses. And all the while, if Vincent presents his papers to Judge Morrison here, there is a real risk Morrison will honor them as a courtesy between courts. Then we need something faster." Cross leaned forward. "There is one option that would immediately strengthen your position. If Clara were to remarry, the guardianship issue becomes more complicated. A married woman with a husband who has financial means and social standing is a much harder target than a single widow." Nathaniel sat very still. "You are suggesting I marry her." "I am suggesting it is the most effective legal strategy available. But we barely know each other. Marriage is a legal contract, Mr. Caldwell. Love is optional. What matters is that it would give you and Clara a much stronger position in any custody fight. And if you formally adopt Emma as your daughter, Vincent's claim becomes even weaker." Nathaniel rode back to the ranch in silence, his mind churning with the possibilities and implications. When he arrived, he found Clara in the kitchen, helping prepare dinner. Emma was in the other room, playing with a set of wooden blocks Samuel had carved for her. "Clara," Nathaniel said quietly, "we need to talk." They walked out to the porch where the setting sun painted the snow-covered fields in shades of orange and gold. "I went to see a lawyer today," Nathaniel began. "He says there is a way to protect you and Emma more effectively than anything else we could do." Clara waited, sensing what was coming. "He says if you marry me, and if I adopt Emma, Vincent's legal claim becomes much weaker. A married woman with a financially stable husband is not an easy target for a guardianship suit." Clara turned away, gripping the porch railing. "You are asking me to marry you? I am asking you to enter into a legal arrangement. A contract. You need protection. I need a purpose. We do not have to pretend it is about love." "But it would be a lie," Clara said softly. "It would be a legal truth," Nathaniel corrected. "What we make of it beyond that is up to us." Clara was silent for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "Emma likes you," she said finally. "She calls you Mr. Nate the Kind. She has not trusted a man since her father died. She is a special child." Clara turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "If I agree to this, I have conditions. This is a marriage on paper only. I will have my own room. And if the day comes when I want to leave, you will not stop me." Nathaniel extended his hand. "Agreed." They shook hands, a businesslike gesture that somehow felt more intimate than any embrace. Two people making a bargain against loneliness and danger, hoping it might be enough. December 20th arrived cold and clear. They rode into Cheyenne in Nathaniel's best wagon, Clara wearing the only good dress she owned, Emma clutching her doll and asking excited questions about what a wedding was like. The ceremony took place at St. Mark's Episcopal Church, a small wooden building with a white steeple that gleamed in the winter sun. Reverend Thomas Whitfield officiated, with Sheriff Webb and Benjamin Cross standing as witnesses. The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. When Reverend Whitfield asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both Nathaniel and Clara answered with firm voices, "I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss, just a solemn nod between them, acknowledging the seriousness of what they had done. Emma, who had been watching from the front pew, suddenly ran forward and wrapped her arms around Nathaniel's legs. "Papa! Nate!" she cried joyfully. "You are my papa now!" Nathaniel felt something crack inside his chest. He bent down and lifted Emma into his arms. "Hello there, little daughter," he said, his voice breaking slightly. Clara watched this moment with tears in her eyes, seeing her daughter happy for the first time in months, seeing this hard man gentled by a child's embrace. They proceeded directly to Benjamin Cross's office, where the adoption papers had been prepared. Clara signed with her new name, Clara Caldwell. Nathaniel signed beside her. Judge Albert Morrison, who had been waiting, applied his seal and signature. Emma Morgan became Emma Caldwell in the eyes of the law. "Congratulations, Mr. Caldwell," Cross said with a genuine smile. "You are officially a father." They were walking back to the wagon when it happened. Vincent Whitmore stepped out of the Inter-Ocean Hotel, the finest establishment in Cheyenne, flanked by a large man with a scar bisecting his right cheek. Jake Malone, the detective. "Clara!" Vincent's voice cut through the cold air like a whip. "There you are!" Clara froze, instinctively pulling Emma behind her. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself between his new family and the threat. "Vincent Whitmore, I presume," Nathaniel said calmly. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he took in Nathaniel's expensive coat and confident bearing. "And who are you?" "I am Nathaniel Caldwell, Clara's husband and Emma's father." For a moment, Vincent could only stare in disbelief. "Husband? You married her? When?" "About 2 hours ago, and we just finished the adoption paperwork, before Judge Morrison." "It is all quite legal and proper." Vincent's face flushed red with anger. "You think you can steal my niece with a sham marriage? I have papers from a Pennsylvania court giving me guardianship." "Those papers were signed by Judge Robert Henley," Nathaniel said evenly. "A judge who, I am told, has a reputation for accepting bribes. My lawyer is currently investigating how much you paid him." Vincent's face went pale. The detective beside him tensed. "You cannot prove that." "Not yet. But I will. And when I do, you will not only lose Emma, you will lose your freedom." Sheriff Webb emerged from his office nearby, attracted by the commotion. "Problem here, gentlemen?" Vincent turned to the sheriff eagerly. "Sheriff, I demand you arrest Clara Morgan for kidnapping." "I have legal guardianship papers." Webb looked at the papers Vincent thrust at him, then handed them back. "These papers are from Pennsylvania, Mr. Whitmore. We are in Wyoming. And here in Wyoming, Judge Morrison just granted adoption rights to Mr. Caldwell for the child. Your papers, sir, do not supersede his jurisdiction." "This is outrageous. This is a conspiracy." "You are welcome to file a formal complaint," Webb said calmly. "But until a Wyoming court rules otherwise, Emma Caldwell stays with her parents." Vincent turned back to Nathaniel, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you have won? You think this is over?" "I will not stop. I will bring the full force of the law down on you. And when I do, you will regret the day you crossed me." Nathaniel's voice dropped to a tone as cold as the snow beneath their feet. "If you come to my ranch, if you threaten my family, you will leave in a pine box. That is not a threat. That is a promise. Do you understand me?" Vincent and Jake Malone backed away slowly, but the hatred in Vincent's eyes promised that this was far from over. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the excitement. Clara sat rigid in her seat, processing everything that had happened. "Thank you," she said finally, as the ranch came into view in the distance. "Do not thank me yet," Nathaniel replied. "Vincent will not give up. He is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous, I know. But for the first time in 8 months, I am not running alone." Nathaniel looked at her in the fading light, this woman who had walked through blizzards and starvation to save her daughter, who had just bound her life to a stranger's in order to keep that daughter safe. "No," he said softly, "you are not alone. Neither am I." As they approached the ranch, Jose ran out to meet them, his face troubled. Patron, someone came while you were gone. They left this. He handed Nathaniel an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in neat script. Caldwell, you think you are clever, but the law is on my side. I will return with proper authority, and when I do, you will go to prison for obstruction of justice. We will meet again soon, very soon. Vincent W. Clara read the note over his shoulder, her face paling. What will they do? Nathaniel folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. They will try to take Emma by force. They will claim legal authority and expect us to surrender. But they will have to go through me first, and I do not intend to make it easy. He looked at his ranch hands, at Jose and Buck and Samuel standing ready. We have work to do, gentlemen. If Vincent Whitmore wants a war, then by God, we will give him one he will never forget. Inside the house, Emma stirred and opened her eyes. Papa Nate, she asked sleepily. Are we home? Nathaniel lifted her into his arms. Yes, little one, we are home, and no one is going to take that away from us. But even as he said the words, he knew the real battle was only beginning. Vincent Whitmore was not a man who accepted defeat, and the forces he would bring to bear would test everything Nathaniel had built, everything he had promised, everything he had become. The peaceful days were over. The siege was coming. And Nathaniel Caldwell, the lonely rancher who had opened his door to two strangers in a blizzard, would finally discover whether redemption could be earned through courage or whether some debts could never truly be repaid. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the eaves of the big house. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. And in the warmth of the ranch house, surrounded by people he had not realized he loved until they were in danger of being taken away, Nathaniel Caldwell prepared for the fight of his life. Not for money, not for land, not for pride, but for something infinitely more valuable, for family. The morning after their return from Cheyenne dawned with a crystalline clarity that made the snow-covered landscape shimmer like diamonds scattered across white velvet. Nathaniel stood on the porch before sunrise, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the eastern sky transform from deep purple to pale gold. Behind him, the house was just beginning to stir. Clara would be up soon to make breakfast. Emma would wake asking 1,000 questions, and the ranch hands would gather for their morning assignments. But this morning felt different. The air carried a tension that made the horses restless in their stalls and set the dogs to pacing. Nathaniel had learned long ago to trust these instincts. Something was coming. He was proven right before the sun fully cleared the horizon. Jose appeared on horseback, riding hard from the southern observation post. The urgency in his approach sent a chill down Nathaniel's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Patron, Jose called as he reined in his horse. We have company. 4 riders, maybe 5 miles out, heading this way. They are taking the main road, not trying to hide. Nathaniel set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Armed, I could not tell from that distance, but they ride like men with purpose. Wake Buck and Samuel. Quietly, I do not want to frighten Clara and Emma yet. By the time the sun had risen a hand's width above the mountains, all 3 ranch hands stood gathered in the barn with Nathaniel. Buck had brought the Winchester rifles, checking each one with the practiced efficiency of a man who had fought in more battles than he cared to remember. Could be nothing, Samuel offered, though his tone suggested he did not believe it. Could be ranchers passing through. Nathaniel shook his head. Vincent's note said soon, this is his response. He is coming to test us, to see if we mean what we said. What do you want us to do, boss? Buck asked. Nathaniel considered for a moment. Through the barn door, he could see the house where his new family slept. Everything he had built, everything he now stood to lose, rested on the decisions he made in the next few hours. We do not start the fight, he said finally, but we make damn sure we are ready to finish it. Buck, you and Samuel take positions in the hayloft. Good sight lines, good cover. Jose, you stay mobile. I want you to be my eyes. And remember, we are protecting our home. We have every right to be armed and ready. What about you? Samuel asked. I will meet them at the front gate. Let them see that I am not hiding. Let them understand what they are up against. The 4 riders appeared an hour later, their horses picking carefully through the snow. Nathaniel watched them approach from his position at the gate, standing straight and tall, his coat open despite the cold to show that he carried no weapon in his hands. But the Winchester leaned against the fence post within easy reach, and he knew Buck and Samuel had their rifles trained on the approaching men from the hayloft. As the riders drew closer, Nathaniel recognized Vincent Whitmore in the lead, his city clothes looking ridiculous in the wilderness setting. Beside him rode Jake Malone, the detective with the scarred face. The other two men were strangers, hard-faced individuals who had the look of hired guns. Vincent reined in his horse 20 feet from the gate. For a long moment, the two men studied each other across the snow. "Mr. Caldwell," Vincent said, his voice carrying false politeness, "I trust you received my message." "I did, and I am afraid you have wasted a long ride." "My answer has not changed." Vincent's smile was thin and cold. "I am not here to ask, Caldwell. I am here to inform you that I have filed a formal complaint with the Territorial Marshal in Cheyenne. By the end of this week, federal officers will arrive to enforce my legal guardianship of Emma. When they do, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice if you resist." Nathaniel kept his face expressionless. "File whatever complaints you wish. But Emma is my daughter now, legally adopted before a Wyoming judge. No federal marshal is going to overturn that without a proper hearing." One of the hired guns leaned forward in his saddle, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Maybe we do not need to wait for no marshal," he said, his voice thick with menace. Nathaniel's gaze shifted to the man, and something in his eyes made the gunman's confidence waver. "You are on my land, threatening my family. Under Wyoming law, I have every right to defend both. So before you reach for that weapon, you should ask yourself if whatever Vincent is paying you is worth dying for." The hired gun's hand moved away from his pistol. Vincent's face reddened with anger. "You cannot intimidate me, Caldwell. I have the law on my side. You have a corrupt judge's signature on papers from Pennsylvania. Out here, that means less than nothing." Vincent opened his mouth to respond, but Jake Malone touched his arm, saying something too quiet for Nathaniel to hear. Whatever the detective said made Vincent pause and reconsider. "Very well," Vincent said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We will do this the proper way. But mark my words, Caldwell. By the end of January, Emma will be under my legal custody, and you will be ruined. I will see to it personally." "Get off my land," Nathaniel said quietly, "and do not come back unless you want to test my hospitality with bullets instead of words." The four riders turned their horses and departed, but Nathaniel watched them go with a growing sense of unease. Vincent had backed down too easily. Men that desperate did not simply retreat because of threats. Jose appeared at his elbow, materializing from the shadows as he always did. "That was too simple," the Mexican said, echoing Nathaniel's thoughts. "He has another plan." "Yes," Nathaniel picked up his rifle, "and we need to figure out what it is before he implements it." Inside the house, Claire was teaching Emma her letters at the kitchen table when Nathaniel entered. She looked up, reading the tension in his face immediately. "He came," she said. "It was not a question. 4 of them. Vincent, the detective, and 2 hired guns. They threatened legal action, but backed off when I made it clear we would not surrender easily." Emma looked up from her slate, her young face troubled. "Is the bad man going to take me away? Papa Nate?" Nathaniel crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his large weathered ones. "No one is taking you anywhere, Emma. I promise you that. Your mama and I will keep you safe, even if the bad man brings more people, even then." But Emma's question haunted him through the rest of the day. What if Vincent did bring more people? What if he convinced some territorial official to side with him? Nathaniel had wealth and local influence, but Vincent had Eastern connections and the appearance of legal authority. In a fair fight, Nathaniel was confident he would prevail. But he had learned long ago that desperate men rarely fought fair. That evening, after Emma had been put to bed, Nathaniel and Clara sat in the study together. It had become their habit in the 4 days since the wedding, these quiet conversations after dark when they could speak freely without frightening the child. "You are worried," Claire observed, watching him stare into the fire. "Vincent is not acting like a man who believes he has lost. He is too confident. It makes me think he has something planned that we have not anticipated." Clara was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. In Philadelphia, Vincent was known for bending rules. He would find legal loopholes, bribe officials, forge documents when necessary. David used to say that Vincent could make the law say whatever he wanted it to say. Then we need to be ready for deception, not just force. Nathaniel rose and began pacing, a habit he fell into when thinking through complex problems. Benjamin Cross is investigating the Philadelphia judge, but that will take weeks. We need something faster. Some way to prove that Vincent's guardianship claim is fraudulent or obtained through corruption. Clara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. There was a woman in Philadelphia, she said slowly. Nancy Chen. She was the one who warned me to run. She said she had seen documents, papers that Vincent had tried to hide. She said if I ever needed proof of his corruption, she might be able to help. Can we reach her? I do not know. I left so quickly, I never got her full address. Just knew she lived near the docks, in the immigrant quarter. Nathaniel made a decision. Tomorrow I will send a telegram to Benjamin Cross. He has contacts in Philadelphia. If this Nancy Chen exists and has evidence, he will find her. The next morning brought fresh snow and fresh complications. Nathaniel rode into Cheyenne with Buck as an escort, leaving Jose and Samuel to guard the ranch. The telegraph office was busy with the usual frontier traffic, but the operator took Nathaniel's message for Cross with professional efficiency. The telegram was necessarily brief. Need you to locate Nancy Chen, immigrant quarter near Philadelphia docks. She may have evidence of Vincent Whitmore corruption. Urgent. Will pay all expenses. Caldwell. On their way out of the telegraph office, they nearly collided with Sheriff Webb, who was just arriving. Nate, Webb said, his face grave. I was about to ride out to your place. We need to talk. They found a quiet corner in the nearby general store, away from curious ears. Vincent Whitmore came to see me yesterday, Webb said without preamble. He has retained a lawyer here in Cheyenne. Not Benjamin Cross, but Marcus Kane. You know him? Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten. Marcus Kane was a different breed of frontier lawyer. Where Cross was ethical and methodical, Kane was ruthless and effective. He had a reputation for winning cases through intimidation and manipulation of technicalities. I know of him. Nothing good. Kane filed a motion with Judge Morrison demanding that Emma be remanded to Vincent's custody pending a full hearing on the guardianship matter. He is arguing that your marriage to Clara was a fraudulent attempt to circumvent legitimate legal proceedings. Can Morrison grant that? Webb hesitated. Legally? It is complicated. Pennsylvania's guardianship order does carry some weight under interstate comedy rules. If Kane can convince Morrison that Vincent has a legitimate prior claim, and that your marriage was indeed a sham to evade that claim, then yes, Morrison could order Emma into temporary custody while the matter is adjudicated. How long do we have? The hearing is set for December 28th, 8 days from now. Nathaniel felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. 8 days? That is not enough time to investigate Vincent's corruption or to prove the Pennsylvania judge was bribed. Webb put a hand on his shoulder. I know, and I am sorry, Nate, but there is more. Kane has subpoenaed several witnesses, including Clara. She will have to testify about the circumstances of your marriage. They are going to try to prove it was a business arrangement, not a real marriage. That is exactly what they are going to do. And Nate, if they succeed, it is not just Emma who will be in jeopardy. You and Clara could both face charges of fraud and conspiracy. The ride back to the ranch was silent and grim. When they arrived, Nathaniel found Clara in the kitchen preparing lunch. He waited until Emma was occupied with her dolls in the other room before telling her about the hearing. Clara listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. They want me to testify that our marriage is not real, she said when he finished. Yes, and if we admit the truth that it was primarily a legal arrangement to protect Emma, Kane will use that to invalidate the marriage and the adoption. And if we lie, if we claim it was a love match, Clara, they will ask questions, intimate questions about our relationship. They will want to know details that would be obvious to any real married couple. Details we do not have because we barely know each other. Clara stood and moved to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. So we are trapped. Tell the truth and lose Emma. Lie and be exposed as frauds anyway. Not necessarily. She turned to look at him, hope and confusion mixing in her eyes. What do you mean? Nathaniel took a deep breath, knowing what he was about to propose would change everything between them. The problem is that our marriage does not look real because we have been treating it like a business arrangement. Separate rooms, formal interactions, no real intimacy beyond what politeness requires. Anyone who watches us can see that we are not truly husband and wife. You want us to pretend better? No, I want us to stop pretending altogether. He moved closer to her, his voice gentle but serious. Clara, we have 8 days before that hearing. 8 days to become what we told the court we already are. A real married couple, not in name only, but in truth. We need to live as husband and wife, learn each other's habits, create the kind of intimacy that comes from sharing a life together. Not for show, but genuinely. Because if we cannot convince ourselves that this marriage is real, we will never convince Judge Morrison. Clara stared at him, processing what he was suggesting. You want me to move into your room? I want us to share our lives completely. Yes, that includes sharing quarters. But it also means sharing meals, sharing conversations, sharing the thousand small moments that make two people into one family. I am not talking about forcing anything physical between us. I am talking about building something real in whatever time we have. And if I cannot do that, if I cannot pretend to love you after knowing you for less than 2 weeks, Nathaniel met her eyes steadily. Then we will face Cain's questions with the truth and hope that honesty counts for something. But Clara, I need you to understand something. In the past week, watching you with Emma, watching you learn this ranch, seeing your courage and your determination, I have come to respect you more than I have respected anyone in a very long time. Maybe it is not love yet. Maybe it never will be. But it is something, and maybe something is enough to build on. Clara was silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, we try. We try to make this marriage real in 8 days. And we prayed as enough to save my daughter. The transformation began that very afternoon. Clara moved her belongings into Nathaniel's room, the master bedroom that overlooked the eastern pastures. It felt strange at first, seeing her dresses hanging beside his shirts, her brush on the dresser next to his pocket watch. But they had agreed, and so they proceeded with determined awkwardness. That first night, they lay in the same bed for the first time, a careful distance between them, both staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Tell me about Rebecca, Clara said suddenly. Nathaniel was quiet for so long, she thought he would not answer. She was the daughter of a merchant in Denver, he finally said. I met her when I was buying supplies for a cattle drive. She was 19, I was 27. She had red hair and green eyes, and when she laughed, it sounded like music. We were married within 3 months. He paused, and Clara waited patiently. I thought I could have it all. The ranch, the wealth, the family. I worked 16-hour days, built this place from nothing. Rebecca never complained, but I see now how lonely she must have been, how isolated. And when she needed me most, when our son was coming too early and something was wrong, I was not there. I was shaking hands with cattle buyers in Cheyenne, counting my money while she died. His voice broke on the last words. Clara reached across the space between them and found his hand in the darkness. You cannot change the past, she said softly, but you can honor her memory by not making the same mistake twice, by being here now for Emma and for me. That is what matters. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, and they fell asleep that way, connected by grief and hope in equal measure. The days that followed took on a strange intensity. They moved through the rhythms of domestic life with conscious deliberateness, learning each other's preferences and quirks. Nathaniel discovered that Clara sang softly to herself when she cooked, that she always tucked her hair behind her right ear when she was concentrating, that she had a sharp wit and sharper intelligence that he had not fully appreciated before. Clara learned that Nathaniel took his coffee black and bitter, that he read every evening before bed, that he had a gentle patience with Emma that contrasted beautifully with his hard exterior. She learned that he still grieved Rebecca deeply, but was trying, in his halting way, to open his heart again. They began taking walks together after Emma went to bed, wrapped in heavy coats against the cold, talking about everything and nothing, about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, about what kind of people they wanted to become. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, Nathaniel surprised them both by producing gifts. For Emma, a doll he had commissioned from a craftsman in Cheyenne, with real hair and a beautiful dress. For Clara, a music box that played a haunting melody. It was Rebecca's, he admitted, as Clara turned the key and listened to the delicate tune. She loved this box. I could never bear to open it after she died. But I think she would want you to have it now. I think she would understand that life goes on and that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. I cannot accept this. It is too precious. Nathaniel closed her fingers gently around the box. You are my wife. Emma is my daughter. You are both precious to me. Please, take it. That night, for the first time, Nathaniel put his arm around Clara as they lay in bed. She nestled against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was not passion, not yet, but it was intimacy of a deeper kind, the intimacy of trust and vulnerability. Maybe we can make this work, she whispered into the darkness. Maybe we already have, he replied. But their fragile peace was shattered on December 26th, 2 days before the hearing. Samuel came running to the house just after breakfast, his face tight with alarm. Boss, someone cut the fence on the north pasture last night. 100 head of cattle are scattered across the territory. It will take days to round them up. Nathaniel felt rage and understanding war within him. This was Vincent's doing, a distraction, a way to pull resources away from the ranch and create chaos before the hearing. Jose and I will handle it, Samuel continued, but we will need Buck too. It is too much ground for just 2 men, which means the ranch would be undefended except for Nathaniel himself, which meant Clara and Emma would be vulnerable. No, Nathaniel said firmly, Buck stays here. You and Jose do what you can, but do not push too hard. Those cattle are not worth risking lives over. After Samuel left, Nathaniel went to find Buck in the barn. The old soldier was checking his rifle, a grim expression on his weathered face. You know this is a setup, Buck said without looking up. I know. Vincent is trying to divide our forces, make us easier targets. You think he will try something before the hearing? I think desperate men do desperate things, and Vincent is running out of time. If Morrison rules against him in 2 days, his leverage disappears. He may decide to take Emma by force while he still can. Buck finally looked up, his eyes hard. Then we need to be ready for a fight, a real one. That evening, Nathaniel gathered Clara and Emma in the study. Emma played with her new doll while the adults talked in low voices. I need you to understand something, Nathaniel told Clara. The hearing in 2 days may never happen. Vincent is getting desperate, and desperate men take desperate actions. I think he may try to take Emma before we ever get to court. Clara's face went pale, but her voice was steady. What do? We prepare. Buck and I will take turns standing watch. You need to keep Emma close, preferably in the house. If anything happens, you take her to the root cellar. There is a hidden door in the pantry that leads down. You stay there until either Buck or I come for you. And if you do not come? Clara, Nathaniel said firmly, grasping her shoulders, I will come, I promise you. I did not survive 4 years of war and 20 years of frontier life to lose my family now. The night of December 26 passed without incident, but the tension was almost unbearable. Nathaniel stood watch on the porch, rifle in hand, while Buck patrolled the perimeter. Every sound made them tense. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Dawn came gray and cold. Still nothing. Maybe we are wrong, Buck suggested as they changed shifts. Maybe Vincent is going to wait for the hearing after all. Maybe. But Nathaniel did not believe it. His instincts, honed by years of surviving in dangerous territory, screamed that something was coming. He was proven right at noon on December 27th, the day before the hearing. Jose came galloping in from the South Range, his horse lathered and heaving. Patron! A dozen riders, maybe more, coming from the east. They are armed and moving fast, maybe 30 minutes away. Nathaniel felt a cold calm settle over him, the same feeling he had experienced before every cattle drive through hostile territory, every negotiation with dangerous men. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided. Buck, he called, get Clara and Emma to the cellar, now! Buck moved with military efficiency, ushering a protesting Clara and a frightened Emma toward the house. I want to stay with you, Clara insisted. You need to protect Emma. That is your job. Mine is to stop them from getting to the house. Now go. She went, but not before grabbing his face and kissing him hard and desperately. You come back to us, she ordered. Do you hear me? You come back. I will. I promise. Nathaniel, Buck, and Jose took up positions behind the stone wall that Nathaniel had built years ago as a windbreak. It was chest high and solid, good cover for a defensive stand. They had 3 rifles and enough ammunition to hold off a small army if necessary. The question was whether it would be enough. The riders appeared as a dark mass on the horizon, moving fast through the snow. As they drew closer, Nathaniel could make out Vincent's distinctive black coat, and beside him, Jake Malone. But the other 10 men were strangers, hard cases recruited from God knows where. Some carried rifles across their saddles. Others had pistols holstered at their hips. They reined in about 50 yards from the wall, just out of easy rifle range. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Vincent urged his horse forward a few steps, stopping at a distance where he could be heard without shouting. "Caldwell, we are here under legal authority. I have a writ from Judge Morrison ordering the immediate release of Emma Morgan into my custody." He held up a paper, waving it in the air. "Morrison would not issue that writ," Nathaniel called back. "Not without a hearing. The hearing was moved to this morning. You failed to appear, so Morrison ruled in my favor by default. Now surrender the child, or we will take her by force." It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But Nathaniel understood what Vincent was attempting. Create the appearance of legal authority, recruit enough guns to make resistance seem futile, and hope that Nathaniel would surrender rather than risk bloodshed. "I do not believe you," Nathaniel shouted, "and you are not taking one step closer to my house." Vincent turned to his hired guns and said something Nathaniel could not hear. Several of the men dismounted and began spreading out, trying to flank the defensive position. "Buck, Jose," Nathaniel said quietly, "do not kill anyone unless you have to, but make them understand that continuing forward is suicide." He raised his rifle and fired a shot into the snow 5 feet in front of the nearest approaching man. The crack of the Winchester echoed across the winter landscape like thunder. The hired gun froze. "The next shot will not miss," Nathaniel called out, "and neither will the shots from my men. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Leave now while you still can." For a moment, it seemed like Vincent's plan would crumble. The hired guns looked at each other uncertainly, clearly not eager to die for whatever Vincent was paying them. But then Vincent made his fatal mistake. He reached for his own pistol, perhaps intending only to wave it for emphasis, perhaps intending to fire. The exact intention did not matter, because the moment the gun came out, Buck's rifle spoke. The bullet took Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him half around and dropping him from his saddle. He hit the snow hard, screaming in pain and shock. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Jake Malone went for his gun. Jose's rifle barked, and Malone's hat flew off his head. The detective threw himself from his horse, scrambling for cover. Several of the hired guns opened fire, bullets whining off the stone wall. Nathaniel, Buck, and Jose returned fire with disciplined precision, not trying to kill but to intimidate, to make the cost of continuing too high. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 of the hired guns were wounded, neither seriously. Vincent lay in the snow, clutching his shoulder and screaming for help. The others, seeing their employer down and realizing they were facing men who knew how to shoot, broke and ran. Jake Malone tried to rally them, but it was useless. Within moments, the attackers were in full retreat, several of them pausing only long enough to throw Vincent across the saddle before disappearing over the ridge. When the dust settled, Nathaniel slowly stood, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Beside him, Buck and Jose lowered their rifles. "You hit him," Nathaniel said to Buck. "Center mass, just like I intended. Shoulder wound, painful but not fatal. He will live to regret this day." Jose crossed himself. "Madre de Dios, that was close, Patron. Too close." Nathaniel looked back at the house where he knew Clara and Emma were hiding in the cellar. "We need to get to town, get Sheriff Webb out here to document what happened. And we need to make sure that Morrison really did issue that writ, or if Vincent was lying. But first, he needed to tell his family that they were safe." He found Clara and Emma in the root cellar, huddled together in the dim lamplight. Emma was crying silently, her face buried in her mother's shoulder. Clara looked up when Nathaniel appeared at the top of the stairs, and the relief in her eyes was almost painful to witness. "Is it over?" she asked. "It is over. They are gone." Emma launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and sobbing. "I was so scared, Papa Nate. I thought the bad man would take me away." Nathaniel held her tight, feeling her small body shake with relieved tears. No one is taking you anywhere, little one. I promised you that, remember? And I keep my promises. Over Emma's head, his eyes met Clara's. In that moment, something passed between them that went beyond words, beyond even love. It was recognition. Recognition that they had become, through fire and fear and desperate necessity, exactly what they had pretended to be. A family. A real family, bound not by blood or law, but by choice and sacrifice, and the willingness to stand together against whatever darkness threatened to tear them apart. Sheriff Webb arrived 2 hours later with a deputy and a doctor. He examined the scene, took statements from all three defenders, and pronounced the shooting clearly justified self-defense. Vincent Whitmore and his men attacked your property with intent to kidnap a child, Webb said as he wrote his report. You had every right to defend your home. And no, for the record, Judge Morrison issued no such writ. That paper Vincent was waving was a forgery. So the hearing is still scheduled for tomorrow? Nathaniel asked. As far as I know. But Nate, after what happened here today, I suspect Marcus Kane is going to have a much harder time arguing that you are the unreasonable party in this dispute. That evening, after Emma had been put to bed and the adrenaline had finally worn off, Nathaniel and Clara sat together in the study. She leaned against him on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders, both of them exhausted but unable to sleep. You kept your promise, Clara said softly. You said you would protect us, and you did. I had help. Buck and Jose are good men, but you were willing to die for us. That is not something I take lightly. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. A week ago, I would have said I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, because I owed a debt to the universe for failing Rebecca. But today, when I saw Vincent and his men riding toward our home, I realized something. What? I was not fighting for redemption or to settle some cosmic debt. I was fighting because I love you, both of you. Emma is my daughter in every way that matters, and you, Clara, you have become my wife in truth. I do not know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was gradual, maybe it was sudden, but it is real. What we have is real. Clara turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. I was so frightened that I would lose you today, that Emma and I would be alone again, and I realized that I cannot imagine my life without you anymore. It has only been 2 weeks, but Nathaniel, I think I love you too. He kissed her then, properly and deeply, not the desperate kiss from earlier, but something tender and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, both of them were smiling through tears. Tomorrow we face Kane and Morrison, Nathaniel said. Tomorrow we make our case and hope that justice prevails. But tonight, let us just be grateful. Grateful that we found each other. Grateful that we are alive. Grateful that we have become something neither of us expected. A family, Clara agreed. A real, true, impossible family. They sat together in the firelight, holding each other, knowing that the hardest test was still to come. The hearing tomorrow would determine everything. But for now, in this moment, they had won something more valuable than any legal victory. They had won each other. And whatever happened in that courtroom, they would face it together, as husband and wife, as father and mother, as a family united against a world that had tried its best to tear them apart. The fire crackled, the wind whispered outside, and in the master bedroom upstairs, Emma slept peacefully, guarded by 2 people who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. The siege was over, but the war for their future was just beginning. That night, Nathaniel and Clara held each other close, knowing that tomorrow would decide everything. Tomorrow they would face Judge Morrison. Tomorrow they would fight not with rifles, but with truth. The morning of December 28th arrived with a sky the color of old iron and a wind that cut through even the thickest coats. Nathaniel stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. Behind him, Clara fastened the buttons on her best dress, the same one she had worn for their wedding just 8 days ago. 8 days that felt like a lifetime. You look fine, Clara said, coming to stand beside him. Better than fine. You look like a man who has nothing to hide. Nathaniel met her eyes in the mirror. I am terrified, he admitted. I have faced down outlaws and survived blizzards and built an empire from nothing. But the thought of losing Emma in that courtroom today, the thought of failing you both after everything we have been through, That terrifies me more than anything I have ever faced. Clara took his hand, squeezing it firmly. Then we are terrified together. But Nathaniel, whatever happens in that courtroom, we have already won something. We have found each other. We have become a family. No judge can take that away from us. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, drawing strength from her presence. I love you, he said simply. I love you too. Now let us go show Judge Morrison and Marcus Kane and Vincent Whitmore what a real family looks like. Downstairs, Emma sat at the kitchen table with Buck, who was teaching her a card game to distract her from the tension. When she saw her parents descending the stairs, she jumped up and ran to them. Do I have to go to the courthouse too? She asked, her small voice uncertain. Yes, sweetheart, Clara said, kneeling to Emma's level. But you do not need to be afraid. Papa Nate and I will be right there with you, and we are going to tell the judge the truth, that we are a family, and that families stay together. What if the judge does not believe us? Nathaniel crouched down beside Clara so that both parents were eye level with their daughter. Emma, do you remember what I promised you? That no one would take you away from us? Emma nodded. I keep my promises, little one, always. They rode into Cheyenne in the wagon with Buck and Jose following on horseback as escorts. The town was more crowded than usual, word of the custody hearing having spread through the community. Frontier settlements thrived on drama, and this case had all the elements of a compelling story. The rich rancher, the desperate widow, the corrupt Easterner, the child caught in the middle. The courthouse was a two-story wooden building painted white with a bell tower that had never held a bell. Inside, the main courtroom was already filling with spectators. Nathaniel recognized many faces from town. Merchants he traded with, ranchers he knew, even a few of the saloon girls who had apparently closed shop for the morning to watch the proceedings. Benjamin Cross was waiting for them near the front, his leather briefcase open on the defense table, papers spread out in careful organization. Nathaniel, Clara, he greeted them quietly. How are you holding up? We have been better, Nathaniel admitted. What are we facing? Cross gestured for them to sit, then leaned in to speak privately. Marcus Kane is good, very good. He is going to attack the legitimacy of your marriage from every angle. The speed of the wedding, the lack of courtship, the fact that you maintained separate rooms initially. He has witnesses prepared to testify that the marriage appears to be a legal convenience rather than a genuine union. We expected that, Clara said. Yes, but there is more. Kane has also filed an affidavit from a doctor in Philadelphia claiming that you, Clara, showed signs of mental instability after your first husband's death. Depression, erratic behavior, inability to make sound decisions. He is building a case that you were not in your right mind when you married Nathaniel, and therefore the marriage should be annulled. That is a lie. Clara's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. I know, but we have to be prepared to counter it. Cross looked at Nathaniel. The good news is that Sheriff Webb has provided a detailed report about the attack on your ranch yesterday. That works strongly in our favor. It shows Vincent's true character and his willingness to break the law to get what he wants. Is Vincent going to be here? Nathaniel asked. No, he is still recovering from his shoulder wound. But Jake Malone will be here to testify on his behalf, along with Kane's other witnesses. The bailiff calls the court to order, and everyone rose as Judge Albert Morrison entered. Morrison was 63 years old, with white hair and a stern face that gave away nothing. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to the letter of the law. Be seated, Morrison said, his voice carrying easily through the crowded courtroom. This court is convened to hear the matter of Vincent Whitmore versus Nathaniel and Clara Caldwell regarding custody of the minor child Emma Morgan, now Emma Caldwell. Mr. Kane, you may present your opening statement. Marcus Kane rose smoothly. He was 45 with dark hair slicked back and a voice like honey over steel. He addressed the courtroom with the confidence of a man who had won more cases than he had lost. Your Honor, this case is about the sanctity of the law and the protection of children. My client, Vincent Whitmore, is the uncle of Emma Morgan and her closest living male relative. After the tragic death of his brother David Morgan, Mr. Whitmore sought and was granted legal guardianship by a Pennsylvania court. This was done with the full authority of the law and with the child's best interests at heart. Kane paced slowly, making eye contact with the spectators. But Clara Morgan, the child's mother, chose to flee rather than honor that legal order. She kidnapped her own daughter and ran across half the country, depriving Emma of her rightful guardian. And when she finally ran out of places to hide, she entered into a fraudulent marriage with a wealthy rancher, attempting to circumvent the legitimate authority of the Pennsylvania court. He turned to face Nathaniel and Clara directly. Make no mistake, Nathaniel Caldwell may be a respected member of this community, but the evidence will show that his marriage to Clara Morgan was a calculated business arrangement designed to obstruct justice. They barely knew each other when they married. They maintained separate living quarters. This was not a union of hearts, Your Honor. It was a legal maneuver. And this court should treat it as such. Kane sat down, looking satisfied. Benjamin Cross stood, and Nathaniel noticed that his lawyer moved more slowly, more deliberately than Kane. Where Kane was flash and performance, Cross was substance and sincerity. Your Honor, Cross began, his voice quiet but caring, my learned colleague would have you believe this is a simple case of law enforcement. But the real question before this court is not about legal technicalities. It is about what is best for a child. It is about justice versus the appearance of justice. Cross moved to stand beside Clara and Nathaniel. The evidence will show that Vincent Whitmore obtained his guardianship order through corruption, bribing Judge Robert Henley of Philadelphia with $150. The evidence will show that Mr. Whitmore's true interest in Emma is not paternal care, but financial gain. He has been systematically stealing from the child's trust fund and needs continued access to complete his theft. He paused, letting that sink in. As for the marriage between my clients, yes, it began as a practical arrangement. But Your Honor, many frontier marriages begin that way. What matters is not how a marriage starts, but what it becomes. And the evidence will show that Nathaniel and Clara Caldwell have built a genuine partnership, a true family in which young Emma is thriving. Cross returned to his seat and Morrison made some notes before speaking. Very well. Mr. Kane, call your first witness. Kane stood. The petitioner calls Sheriff Marcus Webb. There was a murmur of surprise through the courtroom. Webb had filed a report supporting Nathaniel, but now Kane was calling him as a witness? Nathaniel exchanged a worried glance with Cross. Webb took the stand and was sworn in. Sheriff Webb, Kane began smoothly, you have known Nathaniel Caldwell for many years, correct? That is correct. Would you say you are friends? I would say we are friendly acquaintances. He once gave me a place to recover from an injury. I am grateful for that. So you owe him a debt, Kane said, making it sound ominous. Now, Sheriff, you filed a report about an incident at the Caldwell Ranch yesterday. Can you describe what you found when you arrived? Webb's jaw tightened, but he answered honestly. I've found evidence of gunfire. Vincent Whitmore had been shot in the shoulder. Several other men had been wounded. Mr. Caldwell and his ranch hands admitted to firing the shots. So Mr. Caldwell shot an unarmed man who was attempting to serve legal papers? That is not what happened. Kane held up a hand. Please just answer the question, Sheriff. Did Mr. Caldwell shoot Vincent Whitmore? Yes or no? One of his ranch hands did, but it was self-defense. Whitmore and his men attacked the ranch. With legal papers, Kane repeated. They came to serve legal papers and were met with violence. Nathaniel felt his anger rising, but Clara's hand on his arm steadied him. They came with forged papers and a dozen armed men, Webb said firmly. They opened fire first. Do you have evidence of that? Kane asked. Or is this based solely on the word of the men who did the shooting? Webb's face reddened, but he had to admit, I have their statements and the evidence at the scene. No independent witnesses then. Thank you, Sheriff. No further questions. Cross rose for cross-examination. Sheriff Webb, in your professional opinion, was the force used by Mr. Caldwell and his men justified? Absolutely. They were defending their home against armed attackers. And these papers that Vincent Whitmore claimed to have you verified their authenticity? I contacted Judge Morrison's office. No such writ was ever issued. The papers were forgeries. A stir went through the courtroom. Kane objected, but Morrison allowed the testimony to stand. Cross continued, Sheriff, in your years of law enforcement, have you ever known Nathaniel Caldwell to be violent or lawless? Never. He is one of the most upstanding citizens in the territory. Thank you. No further questions. Kane called several more witnesses over the next hour. A woman from Cheyenne who claimed she had seen Nathaniel and Clara together in town, and they seemed distant and formal. A merchant who testified that he had sold separate bedroom furniture to the Caldwell Ranch in early December. Each piece of testimony was designed to chip away at the legitimacy of the marriage. But then Cross began his counter-assault. He called Margaret Dawson, the neighbor who had witnessed the wedding and had visited the ranch regularly since. "Mrs. Dawson," Cross asked, "you have observed Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell together on numerous occasions. In your opinion, how do they behave toward one another?" Margaret smiled warmly. "They behave like any married couple that is still learning each other. Awkward sometimes, yes, but genuine. I see the way he looks at her when she is not watching. I see the way she touches his arm when she passes. Those are not the actions of people play acting, Mr. Cross. Those are the actions of people falling in love." Several women in the audience nodded approvingly. "And the child? Emma? How does she seem? That little girl is thriving. She calls Mr. Caldwell Papa Nate with such affection. She has gained weight, she laughs constantly, she is learning her letters. Whatever else might be said about how this family came together, there is no question that Emma is better off now than she was when she arrived half frozen at their door." Cross then called Buck Harrison to the stand. "Mr. Harrison, you have worked for Nathaniel Caldwell for 8 years. Tell us about the man you know." Buck's weathered face was serious as he spoke. "Nate Caldwell is the finest man I have ever worked for. Fair, honest, hardworking. When his wife Rebecca died, it nearly destroyed him. For 5 years, I watched him exist but not live, if you understand me. Then Clara and Emma came, and I watched him come back to life. I watched him become the man he used to be, the man he should have stayed. That is not fake, Your Honor. That is real." Kane tried to shake Buck on cross-examination, but the old soldier was unshakable. Then Cross played his trump card. "I call Clara Caldwell to the stand." Clara rose, her hands trembling slightly. Nathaniel squeezed her hand before she walked to the witness box. She was sworn in and sat down, her back straight, her gaze steady. Cross approached gently. "Mrs. Caldwell, I want to start with the hardest question. Was your marriage to Nathaniel Caldwell, at the time it occurred, primarily a legal arrangement to protect Emma?" Clara met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, at the time it was." A murmur went through the crowd. Kane looked triumphant, but Cross continued. "At the time it occurred." "What about now, Mrs. Caldwell? What is your marriage now?" Clara's voice strengthened. "Now it is everything. Now it is real. Mr. Cross, I was so desperate when I arrived at Nathaniel's door that night. I was starving, freezing, convinced I was about to watch my daughter die. And this man, this stranger, took us in. He fed us, warmed us, protected us. He asked for nothing in return except the chance to do something good." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When he proposed the marriage arrangement, I said yes because I had no other choice. But over these past 2 weeks, I have watched him with Emma. I have seen his patience, his kindness, his determination to be the father she needs. I have talked with him late into the night about our fears and hopes. I have learned his habits and his heart, and I have fallen in love with him." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. "Is our marriage conventional? No. Did it start in the typical way? No, but it is real, Mr. Cross. My love for Nathaniel is real. His love for me is real. Our family is real. And I will fight with every breath in my body to keep it together." The courtroom was silent. Several women were crying openly. Cross let the moment breathe before asking his final question. "Mrs. Caldwell, if this court were to grant Vincent Whitmore custody of Emma, what would you do?" Clara looked directly at Judge Morrison. "I would run again. I would take my daughter and disappear, and I would spend the rest of my life running. Because I will not let that man hurt my child. I will not let him steal what little family we have built. I would rather be a fugitive than watch Emma suffer under his care." "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Cross sat down. Kane stood for cross-examination, his expression predatory. "Mrs. Caldwell, you say you love your husband, yet you maintained separate bedrooms for the first week of your marriage, did you not?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "We did, yes. We were strangers learning to live together, but we shared a bed for the past 6 nights. We shared our fears and our hopes. We became husband and wife in truth." Kane pressed on. You were treated for depression in Philadelphia after your first husband died. Were you not? I was sad, Mr. Kane. My husband had just died. I was grieving. That is not the same as being unstable. But you made the irrational decision to flee across the country with a small child, with no plan and no resources. I made the decision to protect my daughter from a man who wanted to steal her inheritance. That was not irrational. That was maternal. Kane tried several more angles of attack, but Clara stood firm on each one. Finally, he dismissed her with obvious frustration. Morrison called for a brief recess, and Nathaniel met Clara as she stepped down from the witness box. He pulled her into his arms, not caring who was watching. You were magnificent, he whispered. I just told the truth. When court reconvened, Cross stood. Your Honor, I have one more witness. I call Emma Caldwell to the stand. There was an immediate objection from Kane, arguing that the child was too young to testify meaningfully. But Morrison overruled him. I want to hear from the girl whose future we are deciding. Emma walked to the witness box, clutching her doll Rosie. She looked tiny in the large chair, her feet dangling above the floor. The bailiff had to help her take the oath, explaining it in simple terms. Cross approached her with infinite gentleness. Hello, Emma. Do you know why you are here today? Emma nodded solemnly. The judge wants to know if I should stay with Mama and Papa Nate or go with Uncle Vincent. That is right. Emma, do you like living with your Mama and Papa Nate? Emma's face lit up. I love it. Papa Nate teaches me about horses, and Mama helps me with my letters, and we have breakfast together every morning. Buck makes me laugh, and Jose tells me stories in Spanish, and Samuel carved me a whole family of wooden animals. Do you feel safe there? So safe. Papa Nate says no one will ever hurt me, and I believe him. He keeps his promises. Cross hesitated, then asked the difficult question. Emma, do you remember Uncle Vincent? The light left Emma's face. Yes. Are you afraid of him? Emma looked down at her doll, her voice very small. Yes. He is mean. He yells at Mama. He said Mama was a bad person, but she is not. Mama is the best person. Cross knelt beside the witness box, eye level with the girl. Emma, if you could choose where to live, who would you choose? Emma looked up, first at her mother, then at Nathaniel. Her young face was serious, older than her years. I choose my family, Mama and Papa Nate. They are my home. Thank you, Emma. Cross stood and addressed the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Kane waived cross-examination, wisely recognizing that attacking a 5-year-old girl would not win him any favor. But he had one final card to play. Your Honor, I call Jake Malone to the stand. The detective took the stand with a confidence that made Nathaniel uneasy. Malone had been there at the ranch attack. He knew what had really happened. But what would he say? Mr. Malone, Kane began, you were hired by Vincent Whitmore to locate his niece, correct? That is correct. And in the course of your investigation, what did you discover about Clara Morgan's behavior? Malone leaned forward. She was erratic, changed her name multiple times, moved constantly, worked menial jobs far below her capabilities. Classic signs of someone not in their right mind, or signs of someone fleeing danger, Cross interjected, rising to his feet. Morrison sustained the objection. Kane continued. Mr. Malone, were you present when Mr. Whitmore attempted to serve his legal papers at the Caldwell Ranch? I was. Can you describe what happened? Malone's account was a masterwork of selective truth. He described their arrival, Vincent's presentation of the writ, and the sudden violence from the defenders. He carefully omitted that the papers were forged, that his side had fired first, that they had come with overwhelming force intended to intimidate. So Mr. Whitmore was attempting a lawful service of papers and was shot for his trouble? Kane summarized. That is correct. Cross stood for cross-examination, and his first question was devastating. Mr. Malone, how much is Vincent Whitmore paying you? Malone hesitated. $50 plus expenses. And you expect to receive a bonus if Emma is returned to his custody? We had discussed a success fee. So you have a financial incentive to see Vincent Whitmore win this case? Malone squirmed. I suppose. Cross moved in. Mr. Malone, you testified that my clients fired first, but you failed to mention that Vincent Whitmore drew his weapon. Correct? He was just trying to emphasize his authority. By drawing a gun? Cross's voice dripped with skepticism. Mr. Malone, how many of you were there? He had there. How many armed men surrounded three defenders? Malone's face reddened. There were 12 of us. 12 armed men against three. And you expect this court to believe that the three defenders were the aggressors? Before Malone could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. A woman in travel-worn clothes rushed in, followed by a harried-looking man who could only be a telegraph operator. Your Honor, the woman called out. Your Honor, I am Nancy Chen from Philadelphia. I have evidence in this case. Morrison banged his gavel. This is highly irregular. Who are you and how did you get in here? Benjamin Cross was already on his feet. Your Honor, this is the witness I have been trying to locate. Please allow her to present her evidence. Morrison considered, then nodded. Very well, but this better be good, Mr. Cross. Bailiff, swear her in. Nancy Chen was a small woman in her 50s, with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She took the stand and immediately began pulling papers from a worn leather satchel. My name is Nancy Chen. I live in Philadelphia. I was Clara Morgan's neighbor and friend. When she fled with Emma, Vincent Whitmore came to my home demanding information. He threatened me, but I had already taken precautions. She held up a sheaf of documents. These are financial records from Vincent Whitmore's business, records he tried to destroy. They show systematic theft from Emma's trust fund, $78,000 over 3 years. I also have a letter written by Vincent himself describing his plan to obtain guardianship in order to access the remaining funds before his gambling debts led to his murder. The courtroom erupted in noise. Kane was on his feet objecting. Morrison was banging his gavel, but Nancy Chen's voice cut through the chaos. I also have an affidavit from Judge Robert Henley himself. She held up another paper. After he was arrested by federal marshals for corruption, he confessed to accepting bribes in multiple cases, including this one. Vincent Whitmore paid him $150 to sign the guardianship order. It is all here, Your Honor. All documented, all proven. She looked directly at Vincent's empty chair. That man is not fit to care for a dog, much less a child. He is a thief, a liar, and a coward. And Clara Morgan is the bravest woman I have ever known for running from him and protecting her daughter. Cross took the documents from Nancy and presented them to Morrison, who examined them carefully, his face growing more stern with each page. Finally, Morrison looked up. Mr. Kane, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Kane was pale, clearly thrown by this unexpected development. Your Honor, I would need time to verify these documents. Morrison's voice was cold. The court will verify them, but Mr. Kane, based on what I am seeing here, I am inclined to believe they are authentic, which means your client obtained his guardianship order through fraud and perjury, which means this entire proceeding is based on a lie. He set the papers down and looked out at the courtroom. This court will take a 30-minute recess while I review this evidence thoroughly. But I will tell you now, if these documents prove to be genuine, my ruling is going to be very clear and very swift. The wait during that 30 minutes was excruciating. Nathaniel held Clara's hand while Emma sat on his lap, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. Nancy Chen sat with them, tears in her eyes as she embraced Clara. You came, Clara whispered. After everything, you came. Of course I came. You are my friend, and that little girl deserves a real family. When Morrison returned, his face was set in hard lines. I have reviewed the evidence presented by Mrs. Chen, including the affidavit from Judge Henley. I have also sent a telegraph to Philadelphia and received confirmation that Judge Henley has indeed confessed to accepting bribes, and that Vincent Whitmore is currently under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. He looked at Kane. Mr. Kane, your client's guardianship order was obtained through illegal means. It is therefore null and void. Furthermore, the evidence of financial wrongdoing makes it clear that Vincent Whitmore has no legitimate claim to custody of Emma Caldwell. In fact, I am recommending that charges be filed against him in this territory as well. Morrison turned his attention to Nathaniel and Clara. As for the question of whether the marriage between Nathaniel and Clara Caldwell is legitimate, I have heard testimony from both sides. I have listened to witnesses describe a relationship that began unconventionally but has become genuine. I have heard from the child herself about her happiness and sense of security. And most importantly, I have seen with my own eyes the love and commitment between these two people. He picked up his gavel. Therefore, It is the ruling of this court that the marriage between Nathaniel and Clara Caldwell is valid and legal. The adoption of Emma Caldwell by Nathaniel Caldwell is confirmed and finalized. Vincent Whitmore's petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. Emma Caldwell will remain with her parents. The gavel fell with a crack that sounded like freedom. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Clara burst into tears, pulling Emma into her arms. Nathaniel embraced them both, his own eyes wet. Nancy Chen was crying and laughing at the same time. Even Benjamin Cross allowed himself a small smile. Morrison had to bang his gavel several more times to restore order. "One more thing," he said. "Mr. Caldwell, I am issuing a restraining order against Vincent Whitmore and his associates. They are not to come within 100 yards of you, your wife, or your daughter. If they violate this order, they will be arrested immediately. And Mr. Caldwell, the territory of Wyoming thanks you for your patience with this process. Justice has been served today." As they filed out of the courtroom, Marcus Kane stood by the doorway, his leather briefcase clutched tight. For a moment, he and Nathaniel locked eyes. Kane's voice was quiet, stripped of its courtroom bravado. "You won, Caldwell. Fair and square." Nathaniel studied this man who had once been his business partner, who had convinced him to attend that fateful meeting instead of returning to Rebecca. The anger he had carried for 10 years felt suddenly hollow. "We both lost something that day, Kane," Nathaniel said finally, "but holding on to hate won't bring her back. For either of us." Kane's throat worked. "I am sorry. For what it is worth, I am sorry I pushed you to stay. If I had known—" "You could not have known. None of us could." Nathaniel extended his hand. "Go in peace, Marcus. The war between us is over." Kane hesitated, then shook his hand. Something old and bitter seemed to lift from both their shoulders. Then Kane walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and Nathaniel turned back to his family. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, and many people congratulated Nathaniel and Clara as they emerged. Sheriff Webb shook Nathaniel's hand firmly. "Well done, Nate. You fought the good fight. We could not have done it without you, Marcus. Thank you." They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow. Emma chattered excitedly about being able to stay with Mama and Papa Nate forever. Nancy Chen rode with them, having been invited to stay at the ranch for a few days before returning to Philadelphia. That evening, after Emma had been put to bed and Nancy had retired to the guest room, Nathaniel and Clara stood together on the porch looking out at their land. "We did it," Clara said softly. "We actually did it. You did it. Your courage, your determination to protect Emma no matter what. That is what won this case." Clara shook her head. "No, we did it together. You gave us a home when we had none. You gave us safety when we were hunted. You gave us love when we thought we would never feel it again." She turned to face him fully. "Nathaniel Caldwell, when I stumbled to your door 2 weeks ago, I thought I was at the end. I thought death was the only escape left. But you showed me that sometimes the end is just the beginning. You gave me a second chance at life, at happiness, at family." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You gave me a second chance too. A chance to be the man I should have been for Rebecca. A chance to keep my promises instead of breaking them. A chance to build a legacy that matters more than money or land." They stood in silence for a moment, comfortable in each other's presence. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we live. We raise our daughter. We build our family. We wake up every morning grateful for what we have instead of grieving for what we lost." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "And maybe, if we are blessed, we give Emma some brothers or sisters to play with." Clara laughed, a sound of pure joy. "One crisis at a time, Mr. Caldwell. But yes, I would like that very much." 6 months later, on a warm June evening, Nathaniel stood in the same spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and golds. But this time, he was not alone. Emma played in the yard with a new puppy that Buck had given her. Clara sat in the rocking chair, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew. Nancy Chen had returned to Philadelphia but wrote often, always addressing her letters to the Caldwell family. Vincent Whitmore had been convicted of embezzlement and fraud, sentenced to 15 years in prison. The money he had stolen from Emma's trust had been recovered, and Benjamin Cross had helped establish a proper trust that would support Emma's education and future. The ranch was thriving. The cattle had never been healthier, the land never more productive. But more than that, the house was alive. It rang with laughter and conversation, with the sounds of family. The empty rooms that had once echoed with loneliness now held purpose and warmth. Jose, Buck, and Samuel had become more than employees. They were Uncle Jose, Uncle Buck, and Uncle Samuel to Emma, part of the extended family that had formed around this unlikely union. "Papa Nate," Emma called from the yard. "Come play with me." "And Rusty." Nathaniel looked at Clara, who smiled and waved him on. "Go on, your daughter is calling." "Our daughter," he corrected gently. "Our daughter," she agreed. As Nathaniel walked down the steps to join Emma in the grass, he thought about the blizzard that had brought Clara and Emma to his door. He thought about the fear and desperation, the battles fought and won, the love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. He thought about Rebecca, and he knew she would approve. She would understand that honoring her memory did not mean staying frozen in grief. It meant learning from past mistakes. It meant opening his heart again, risking pain for the chance at joy. Emma grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the puppy. "Papa, watch this. I taught Rusty to sit." Nathaniel laughed as the puppy sat obediently, then immediately jumped up to lick Emma's face. "That is wonderful, sweetheart. You are a natural teacher." "When I grow up," Emma said seriously, "I want to teach children. Mama says education is important." "Your mama is very wise, Papa. Do you think the new baby will be a boy or a girl?" Nathaniel considered. "I do not know. What do you hope for?" Emma thought for a moment. "I hope for a brother. Then I can teach him everything, just like you taught me. Whatever we have, they will be blessed to have you as a big sister." Emma beamed with pride. That night, after Emma had been tucked in and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Nathaniel and Clara lay in bed together, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the flutter of new life. "Are you happy?" Clara asked. "More than I ever thought possible." "You?" "More than I can express. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe this is real, that we are real. We are very real." Nathaniel kissed her softly. "And we are going to grow old together, you and I. We are going to watch Emma grow up and have children of her own. We are going to build a legacy not of money but of love." "That sounds perfect." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, safe and content, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Because they were no longer two broken people clinging to each other for survival. They were a family, bound by love stronger than blood, forged in the fires of adversity, and tempered by the choice to keep choosing each other every single day. The blizzard that had nearly killed them had instead given them life. The desperate gamble of a marriage of convenience had become the greatest love either had ever known. And the rancher who had thought his story was over had discovered it was only just beginning. In the quiet darkness, Nathaniel whispered a prayer of thanks. Thanks for the blizzard that brought them together. Thanks for the courage to open his door. Thanks for second chances and new beginnings. Thanks for redemption, earned not through wealth or power, but through the simple act of loving and being loved in return. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The land stretched out in all directions, vast and beautiful and home. And in the master bedroom of the big house, surrounded by everything that mattered, Nathaniel Caldwell finally knew peace. The vow he had made to protect his family had been kept. The promise to Emma that no one would take her away had been fulfilled. The commitment to Clara to build something real had been honored. But more than that, he had kept the most important promise of all. The promise to himself and to Rebecca's memory that he would not waste the gift of a second chance, that he would not let fear keep him from love, that he would be the man he was always meant to be. A husband, a father, a protector, a partner, a man redeemed not by grand gestures or heroic deeds, but by the quiet, steady work of showing up every day and choosing love over loneliness, courage over fear, and family over everything else. The rancher's vow had been kept, and in keeping it, he had found everything he never knew he needed.